in American history, in the 1920s, there are limitations of immigrants from Europe, right, from Europe. Prior to that time, there was immigration restrictions, and the most infamous being the Chinese Exclusion Act, which I think was in 1887. The Chinese Exclusion Act was the first time there was any specific racial or ethnic limits put on any kind of immigrants. But the Immigration Act of 24 established quotas for the number of people that could be brought into the United States from various countries. Another manifestation of the conflict, the cultural conflict, was Prohibition. Remember, old America, and many of you wrote about this kind of effectively too, sort of supported laws that would limit alcohol consumption, if not prohibit it. And so old America wanted, because they saw that as being the city, corrupt, the immigrant. And so they supported Prohibition. New America kind of opposed it. The immigrant, the city dweller, opposed Prohibition. I mean, we know this, that eventually what pushes Prohibition over the top, I mean, there had been a temperance movement in the United States since the 1820s and 1830s. That temperance movement had never gone away. During the Progressive Era, that temperance movement got new life and strength because people believed the problems of urban America dealt with alcohol, right? Now, what eventually convinces people to support an amendment that would ban the manufacture, sale, and distribution of alcoholic beverages is World War I. And the fact that Germans brewed beer. So the Germans brew the beer, and so they're probably doing this to get us all drunked up so we can't fight World War I. So we might as well, ban the distribution and sale of alcoholic beverages. What was the legislation that was passed that enforced the 18th Amendment? Does anyone besides Samantha and myself remember the name of the law that would enforce? Go ahead, Danielle. The Volstead Act that was passed. And remember, Prohibition in the Volstead Act goes into effect in 1920. January 1, 1920. That was the 18th Amendment. What amendment repealed? What amendment repealed the 18th Amendment? What amendment repealed it? Go ahead, Samantha.
21st?
21st Amendment repealed it in 1933, which was considered to be a wartime measure, not a wartime measure, a depression measure. And then the big manifestation of the cultural conflict was the Scopes trial. Sometimes the Scopes trial is called the monkey trial. What happened in the Scopes trial, for those of you that did not write about the Scopes trials in the 1920s, and what was on trial was the notion of evolution. Charles Darwin had suggested that human beings evolved over the course of millions of years from lesser life forms, right? That evolution, humans were, kind of ape-like figures that evolved through natural selection, survival of the fittest. And this notion, Darwin's theory of evolution, that he published in 1859, was very controversial. And basically they started to teach it. Some people attempted to teach it in schools as science. Now, religious people resented it and passed laws in Tennessee that would prohibit the teaching of evolution. John T. Scopes defied those laws and taught evolution in a biology classroom in Tennessee. What was the name of the town? Dayton. I think it was Dayton, Tennessee. Taught in Dayton, Tennessee. Now, as a result, Scopes was arrested. He was put on trial and eventually convicted and fined $100. But the subsequent trial was sort of a manifestation of the cultural conflict, with the defense being led by the famous atheist lawyer Clarence Darrow, who had become widely known as a sort of a liberal advocate of free thinking, and believed that the punishment of Scopes was a violation of the separation of church and state. And Darrow, Clarence Darrow, was led Scopes' defense. The prosecution was aided by none other than our favorite loser, William Jennings Bryan, who was the embodiment of old rural America. You know, the old farm religious fundamentalist America. Bryan represented the prosecution. And sort of the circus of what became known as the monkey trial shows you the conflict between those who advocated what might be considered more modern thinking and those who supported traditional thinking. You know, and so the Scopes trial is important to know about. The 20s were also famous for you know, sort of emphasizing the importance of business. And in the 1920s, when Harding was elected to the presidency, he argued that what was going to occur is the country was going to return to normalcy. And part of returning to normalcy meant economic prosperity, which increasingly was viewed as the result of business, you know, prospering. And in the 1920s, we said that business was so popular and business people were so popular that Bruce Bart wrote a best-selling book that was entitled The Man Nobody Knows. And that depicted Jesus as the greatest businessman of all time. And that shows you, you know, sort of how important business was to people. Who was Margaret Sanger? Does anyone besides myself and Lindsay know who Margaret Sanger was? And why she was important in the 1920s? Yes?
She was part of the National Women's Party.
So she was part of the National Women's Party, and so she advocated for women's rights, but it goes even further. She was somebody that the Ku Klux Klan really didn't like, because her name is associated most carefully with what? Go ahead, Nicole. Birth control. Birth control. So Sanger is starting to say, look, you know, the role of women and in terms of relations can be more than just procreation. And so this idea of birth control really, really radical, you know, radical for the time, and rocked sort of people like the Ku Klux Klan. Now, Harding is elected to office in 20. And we said that Harding embodies what people are looking for, return to normalcy. And he looks like, you know, the kind of person that would be the president if that's what you wanted to do. I mean, he is a genial, elderly, kind, non-abrasive, small-town American. And when he is elected to office, he is very popular. He overwhelmingly defeats Cox and Roosevelt in the 1920 election. He is elected to office, but he only serves a short period of time. He only serves until 1923 when he dies. He dies in office, making him the second person to die of natural causes in office. Now, what is his administration defined by? What do we associate with the Harding administration? I mean, certainly, when we think of Harding, what do we think of? Go ahead, Kendrick.
An exhaustion of reform.
What's that?
An exhaustion.
Okay, so you know we do think of that by the time Harding gets into office, the reform spirit is sort of exhausted. A return to normalcy is what America wants. Good. What else? Go ahead, Lindsay.
Scandal.
Yes. What scandal is most famous in the Harding administration, and what did it involve? What scandal is most famous in the Harding administration, and what did it involve? The name of it? What did you say? Dome. Let's put that teapot in front of it. The Teapot Dome scandal. What did the Teapot Dome scandal? If you could pick one word to associate with the Teapot Dome scandal, what would it be? What did it involve? It involved, Teapot Dome involved, yes?
Was it like oil?
Oil, perfect. Oil reserves, right? The scandal involved the U.S. government leasing oil lands to business people in return for bribes. Oil reserves is what was involved with Teapot Dome. And it discredits the Harding administration. But Harding himself does not suffer really any kind of repercussions because he's dead. It makes it hard to suffer anything. In his place comes Calvin